I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. Hey, what's up, world? Welcome to another special edition of I Mix What I Like Live. And we're just going to get right into it with those who are already here because we have a big night with a lot of important people. I'm very excited to catch up with, to have this discussion to commemorate, not, of course, the assassination of Malcolm X, but to commemorate Malcolm himself on this day, this anniversary of his assassination in 1965. And to do that, I'm very happy to have been able to pull together a roundtable of at least a majority or a good handful of the contributors to A Lie of Reinvention, Correcting Manning Marable's Malcolm X, co-edited by myself and Dr. Todd Stephen Burrows, who joins me this evening, along with Dr. Patricia Reed Merritt and Dr. Sundiata Chajua. And we are expecting many others to come on through in the next, I don't know, 60, 90 minutes or so. We'll see. And what I hope to do, and we'll ask our guests what their hopes and expectations are, I would like us to talk a little bit about the history of the project and what's gone on since it's been published. And I have not had a chance to talk with everybody who will be here tonight. So I have some questions for them about their responses and interpretations and experiences themselves. But first, welcome to everybody. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining me and us. It's good to see you all.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
So just quickly, Dr. Patricia Reed Merritt is, among many other things, an author and educator, scholar, and performing artist. She is a distinguished professor of social work and Africana studies at Richard Stockton College in Galway Township, New Jersey. And she was one of the contributors to our project here. Dr. Todd Stephen Burrows, you all know, is a freelancer and regular contributor to I Mix What I Like. He's got a forthcoming incredible project that I cannot wait for us to get into at some point about Mumia Abu Jamal. His work can be found at drumsinthe.globalvillage.com, and nationally syndicated Black journalist and old friend of mine, and good to see him back with us as well. Dr. Sundiata Chajua this bio is a little outdated. You are on some other level at this point, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of your professorship in the Department of History and African-American Studies at the University of Illinois. Can you correct and update me on this bio that I'm looking at from our book that needs obvious update?
I am still an associate professor.
Okay, but I had thought, okay, maybe maybe my memory is messed up. I thought, yeah, Kamal, you're here, man. You're live, man. Turn your camera on. All right, well, Kamal got some new equipment, so we'll bring him back in a minute. No, Sundiata, forgive me. For some reason, I thought that anyway, I thought something else, so forgive me. That's fine. Anyway, but you also have a column, and you're also going to be becoming a contributor to the Black Power Media Project, with a show that you're developing with us as well. So I wanted to definitely remind folks of that. And again, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. And let me say that Mary Frances Berry, VP Franklin, and I have just finished a book on reparations. So we're looking to see that move forward.
Oh, definitely can't wait to see that and have you back to talk more about that as well. And Kamal Franklin, obviously, our comrade, among many other things, working with us with the Black Power Media Collective, co-host with Renegade Culture, longtime activist now with Community Movement Builders, and what I think is very timely for our conversation tonight, among many other things that we could talk about in terms of Kamal's work. But he's a longtime attorney and grassroots community activist, but he specifically was, at least for a time, an attorney for Thomas 15X Johnson, who is right in the news again, being sort of he was mentioned mentioned in the press conference of Earl Wood. I think you're Earl or Eugene Wood, the nephew of Raymond Wood. Anyway, so we'll talk about that. So very excited. And then now just joining us is the founder and head man, Black Classic Press, former Black Panther. Even has a pretty famous son. Paul Coates.
The thing I'm most impressed about with Paul Coates is the first time I went to that printing shop, you could eat off the floor. I mean, that's how clean it was. I mean, I was just like, man, look at this place. No wonder this man is always smiling.
I'm glad you didn't eat off the floor. We may have had some COVID going on before now. So I'm just glad you didn't. I'm glad to join you guys. I was actually on the wrong thing. I clicked the wrong link, and so I ended up somewhere else. So thank you guys.
That might have been my fault. I hope that wasn't my fault. There's so many links getting thrown around, so I apologize for that. I definitely apologize for that. You know, we were just giving some basic introductions. I mean, I have questions that I have for you all, but maybe Paul, we should just start with you, because one of the questions is just why did this project come to be, from your perspective and your memory of pulling this together? Why did you think it was necessary?
Jared, what I remember most is being incensed by it. I mean, I was bubbling when I got the book and all the attention the book was getting, and then I look inside this book and it's crap. And I don't remember, Jared. I knew you, of course, and I knew your fire, but I'm trying to remember. I don't think at the time I had seen anything by you, but immediately you came to mind, and immediately when I called you, you told me, gosh, you almost exploded on the phone also, because you and Todd, I believe, had been doing things around this for a while. And you schooled me on it. And I believe from there, we knew that we had a connection. And I knew that I'd hooked up with a team that could really get the job done. I've never fancied myself or considered myself as a writer, really as a reader. And knowing you as a writer, knowing Todd as a writer, I just knew that we could get this done, you know, lending our stuff. And you guys, I mean, the work you did still stands the test of time. The people you collected and brought together stand the test of time, you know?
Paul, that's very humble. You taught us a lot about writing and reading and publishing in that year it took for that book. So I appreciate the humility. But I felt like I grew as a writer just fighting with you, right, over this book. And I so appreciate what you did for us. Thank you. And I appreciate, and let me just say openly to Dr. Ball, I want to thank you for allowing me to be a part of that project, because there were so many other people in the Africana world you could have chosen. And, you know, choosing a comic book geek like me, you know, I really appreciated that. and I was glad to be part of that project.
Well, we already were working together. We already were friends, and the joke that I know that we all had developed was that you know, there was only a handful of us that were willing to go down with the ship over a project like this. You know, it's like, you know, I mean, you know, and honestly, you know, and that was something I definitely want to ask you all about in terms of your thoughts about it, because there were a number of people that we reached out to who didn't want to be involved, and not because they disagreed, but they didn't want to be publicly, you know, on the chopping block with something like this. Baba Zach Kondo, welcome, by the way. We, you know, just want to acknowledge that you are here. Thank you very much for showing up. And the one or two people out there who might not know who you are, a legendary Africana scholar and author of Conspiracies Unraveling the Assassination of Malcolm X, which is for many of us the foundational book on the assassination. So we're just sort of opening up with some initial thoughts here. I don't necessarily want to lead everything, but if you know, I could start with some other questions. If any of you have anything that you wanted to start with, or any pressing comments or questions or reflections about being on the project, I'm happy to have any of you start.
Let me start then.
Please.
This was not something that I expected to do. One of the reasons why I was able to do it, probably because I didn't know any better in regards to what kind of reaction people might have. I happen to be one of the contributing writers to Black Classic Press. It was a few years after I completed Righteous Self-Determination, the Black Social Work Movement in America. And I got a email, probably from Paul, saying we're doing this project, we're looking for people, and we want you to be one of the contributors. Now, I did pick up the book, I read the book, and thankfully, I was pissed off too. I said, goodness grief, you know. And I mean, I was not a close associate of Manny Marable, but you know, I'm in New Jersey. He was in New York. He had been down to my campus a couple times, and I couldn't imagine what was on his mind. I mean, like, what made you do this? And in my piece, you know, I write about, you know, the transformation of Malcolm X. But in my piece, I started out by saying the one thing the two of them had in common was neither are here to defend themselves. And so it was unfortunate, you know, of course, Malcolm was gone, but it was unfortunate that Manny died as soon as the book was released, because I would have loved to have had a dialogue with him about, tell me the purpose of this. You know, why are you doing this? Why are you doing it? And so when I was invited to do it, you know, I didn't hesitate after I had a chance to read the book. And I thought, yes, you know, I have something to say. I have a lot to say. Let me get it into this one, you know, paragraph. And I have been very happy with my association with this project. And so I do know that at my university, and Jared, yes, things have changed since that last bio, you know, from the book. It's actually Stockton University is no longer Richard Stockton College, but that's another issue. But at my university, some of the classes do use the book. And so, you know, here we are a few years out, and people are still saying this is something that's worthwhile when you take a look at it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really sure. I just wanted to respond quickly to a question I saw. I'm not really sure, but the book we're talking about is Manning Marable's A Life of Reinvention. In terms of the book we were all focused on, the book we have all gathered to create is A Lie of Reinvention, Correcting Manning Marable's Malcolm X, which is a title I think we should come back and talk about at some point too. But in terms of the reaction that we all got, but anybody else want to jump out there with their first thoughts?
I'll jump out really quickly.
Sure.
You know, because I think I got involved after I already wrote a piece because I was so outraged. Right? No one asked me to write anything. I just read the book and I was so sort of outraged at what I thought was Manning Marable's attempt to, you know, I think as I phrase it, sort of a second assassination, Ivory Tower assassination of Malcolm X, because it seemed to be an obvious repositioning of Malcolm to be acceptable to a neoliberal world and neoliberal leaders and a certain class of leaders, and to replace the autobiography as the premier text in which people go to study and read about Malcolm, and making Manning again then the premier person to speak the truth about who Malcolm was and who Malcolm wasn't, and what Malcolm was becoming and who Malcolm would have become. And there seemed to be so many obvious flaws in suggesting that he would have supported Obama, his views on Islam, his views on radical Islam even, and then all the sort of peculiar non-footnoted sort of sleazy innuendos about Malcolm's life. And again, it seemed to be one of these books that when it's written and it has this critical lens of someone like a Malcolm X, it gets embraced by mainstream media. The New York Times all of a sudden wants to do a review of the book about Malcolm X, something they prior wouldn't touch for the most part, unless they get into some sort of critical review. So I think all of that built up around someone like me who was born a few years after Malcolm's assassination, but probably like a lot of folks, my generation, 80s, 90s, got politicized off of hearing Malcolm's speeches and reading the autobiography. And that's, you know, why I got involved in movement politics. Felt like I wanted to contribute to some response. And so I was happy to be a part of the book and to be able just to write down some thoughts and some ideas around where I think the book was flawed. So, yeah.
I just want to
just add one thing to that.
Oh, go right ahead. No, go ahead.
If I could just add one thing to that, the thing that I came away with, you know, after reading the book and all of the discussion, is that somehow or another, I felt like Manny felt like we were all suffering from hero worshiping, and that he had to set the record straight, that for the two generations after Malcolm was assassinated, you know, he grew, his image grew, his influence grew. And I felt like Manny was saying to us, it's too much of this hero worshiping going on. Let's back up and rewrite the story. And that's sort of what I came away with.
I'm glad you said that because I wanted to follow up on both of those things quickly and say this before I forget. I think what you just said about Manning, I think that's what biographers do, right? And I'm a fan of biography. I'm a huge fan of biography. Biography is mostly most of the history I read. I'm not a fan of bad biography. I'm not a fan of biography that's not well researched. I'm not a fan of biography that's not proven, right? I mean, we can argue about David Levering Lewis's, for instance, penchant for commentary, right? But we can't argue about the fact that he went to 7 continents for Du Bois, right? Whether we like what he wrote about Du Bois or not, right? We may not be fans of David Garrow, right? We may or may not. I am, but we may not. Some may not be. But when he did 2,000 interviews on Obama, he did 2,000 interviews on Obama. And not only did he do 2,000 interviews, he read every single article written about Obama and had a whole critique of the articles and critiqued journalists for their laziness in terms of parroting the line. The notes in David Garrow's book on Obama could be its own book, right? So when you have a world historical figure about like Malcolm X, you're supposed to rip him down, but you're supposed to rip him down in context. I just read a book, biography of Stan Lee, the co-creator of Marvel Comics, and the guy is saying he's barely the co-creator. He may not even be that. I mean, because this dude ripped Stan Lee apart, right? But he got all the documentation. He interviewed 150 people, so he knew what he was talking about, right? So my problem with Manning Marable and Les Payne, both of them, is that they waited way too long and got way too old. Hello there. Hi, I see you. Hi. All right. They waited too long and they got way too old to do something serious. So instead of doing something serious, they decided to make a buck. And that's why I attacked both of them, because Malcolm X as a world historical figure deserves a real biography where you interview 100 to 1,000 people, where you go to Mecca and you go find the documents in Mecca about, where he went and what he did. A real biography. And instead of getting a real biography, we have these, and I'm going to say it, sorry, Paul, baby boomer celebrities who think that they created the universe. And because they created the universe, they get to write biographies without having to do any of the work that Joe Schmo from like New York Magazine would have to do, right? And they get rewarded for it because of who they are. Manning Marable got the Pulitzer Prize. Well, who gives out the Pulitzer Prize? Columbia University. Where did Manning Marable teach? Columbia University. Who are all the people that defended Manning Marable when the book came out? All those people, you look at all those people, they got grants. Who did they get grants from? Manning Marable. Where did they go and have visiting professorships at? Columbia University, right? So you have that aspect. Then with Les Payne, well, he's the greatest black investigative journalist of the 20th century. He solved the Tawana Brawley case. Well, we've got to just give him this just because. And I'm like, no. Either you do a biography or you don't. This cannot be tolerated. Because our world historical figures, particularly someone like Malcolm X, and look, I want to disagree with some of you here. The autobiography is really more, the more I read these biographies of Malcolm X, the autobiography is a fiction piece. Now, you may like it. You may have been inspired by it, but it's a fiction piece, right? So it's as fictive as, Zora Neale Hurston's Tracks on a Road, right? It's fictive.
But it's an autobiography. It's not imposed as a definitive historical Pulitzer Prize winning institutional. So an autobiography is, you can excuse from my point of view some of those flaws.
No, you can do what you want with the autobiography, but I'm just saying it's a work of fiction. And particularly when we look at how the autobiography of Malcolm X was created, everybody had an agenda. Haley had an agenda, Doubleday had an agenda, and Malcolm had an agenda, and they all came together to create a work of art that would sell.
But Malcolm couldn't have an agenda in the Viking Press book.
Right, that's true. So I just want to say, so we need a real biography because I think it's important to know what the construction of the autobiography is. And even though we may be inspired by it, I still want to know, okay, what's the reality behind it, right? And we have not had that purposely because white hegemony is not interested in black nationalism, pan-Africanism, or socialism,
Mhm.
and they are not going to fund a major black scholar or a major white scholar to go do the real work on Malcolm X. And that angers me to no end. So I just wanted to say that while I had it in my head. And now I'm going to be quiet.
Todd,
I'm
the
sorry.
first thing I'm going to say is I was wondering why you were apologizing to me.
Yeah, I was trying to figure that out too. So why were you apologizing about
Yeah,
it?
the baby boomers, something I don't relate to.
All right,
I'm a baby boomer.
I didn't know the range.
This thing, man.
Okay, that's good. That's good. No, because I mean, because you know, there's a whole.
Todd, here's what occurs to me. One thing, and I just want to throw this at you because I don't buy the autobiography as fictive. Okay, does it have fiction in it? What does it have this in it? But yeah, that's what autobiographies are. But I'm saying with the same standard that you set for the biography, you'd have to set that same standard for yourself to call it fictive. And I really want you to get that because, like, it's the closest thing that we do have. At least Malcolm, we know that Malcolm participated in it to some extent. The rest of that stuff we know he did not participate in. So is it flawed? Is it problematic? Does it have elements of fiction? I agree. But I think for us to walk away and for us to be satisfied with a declaration of fictive, we have to apply the same requirements that you require for biography. Would we not?
Well, I'll say this. I respect what you're saying, Paul. But I'll say it this way. When I read the 2-volume work on Langston Hughes done by Arnold Rampersad,
sure.
One of the things that he documented that Langston Hughes said to his publisher, if you want me to do, he said 2 things that I think make both of us right here. He said, if you want me to, he said to the publisher, if you want me to write an autobiography, I'll write it, but you better pay for me documenting everything because I'm not going to go do the research for free, right? So he actually went and did the research on his life, allegedly, right? Okay. And I think that makes me right, but I think what makes you right is that Langston Hughes wrote a letter to somebody talking about his 2 autobiographies, and he said, this thing is really kind of a sham because all you're doing is you're putting the most exciting parts of your life together that people want to read, and it makes you have this exciting life that you really didn't have, right? So the needs of the narrative, right, create a certain degree of fiction, which I think is inherent in the genre of autobiography. I think that's just a part of what it is, and we're not even going to go into how people now do the narrative nonfiction techniques of composite characters and scenes switching around, which everybody does, including President Obama. He did that, right? So we're not even going to go into all of that. But I think it's important to say that the autobiography comes out of Playboy magazine. And Malcolm goes to Playboy magazine with a conversion story he wants to tell. And he tells that story, and that's how Doubleday is interested. And then he tells that story again. Now, Les Payne did one positive thing before he got sick and died. He documented evidence that Malcolm X's father was not killed by the local Ku Klux Klan, that it was an accident, and that Malcolm was the only family member who kept that story alive. And the other family members have either disavowed it or don't talk about it. So I'm just saying that the more I read these biographies, the documentation that has been done makes the autobiography go further and further into fiction.
All right,
But
let me. I just want to make sure that we at least hear from Sundiata and Baba Zach one time before the debate continues. And including just my one transition comment that Malcolm was not assassinated because he was the only one to keep that story alive. That's the only thing that I would want to point out in all this. So Brother Sundiata, let me jump in here real quick and. Yeah.
So I'll start where everyone else started. I too had written something before and was part of the project at the Black Scholar to take up the Marable book. Now, for me, I'm probably positioned in relationship to Marable different than everyone else here. I had known Manning since like 1988, and I was part of the leadership of the Black Radical Congress, and to some degree was brought in by Manning. And so I have a sense of Manning's history that I do think is honorable and should be credited, but the book was bullshit. I also don't believe Marable wrote the book.
That's two of us, yeah.
Okay, one we know for certain, there's interviews where Manning says that each chapter was sent to the editor. And then she would make comments on trying how to make it more popular, which meant sensational, so that it would make money, right? And we know that, in fact, that editor in an interview tells the story that when Manning is rushed to the hospital the week that he dies, that he's literally on the gurney and he's saying that he's going to make edits. So we're down to that point, and we know that his wife Leith is the last. Well, I don't think she's the last one, but we know that she was tasked with bringing the book together. Now, what I think happened, at least the way I read it, because when you read the book, you can see that there are things that suggest that, well, this is the way Manning Marable mind works, and then you see passages where you say, this is some undergraduate student that didn't finish the course they had with Manning, right? And then you can see other things that seem to be written by other people. So I think that we got to put all of that in the mix. And I do think that Manning thought, always having to deal with the criticism that he didn't go to the archives, he thought he invented a methodology that would erase that criticism for entirety. So what he tried to do was put together this research team. I can tell you, you don't want historians based on their training to put together research teams. Social scientists are used to working collaboratively, and they manage those kinds of things. Historians, for the most part, are lone wolves. And unless they are brought out of that kind of approach early, they're not going to do good managing the research team. And so what we find is that there are things that should have been summaries that were given to Manning to then go back in, revise, and contextualize that make their way into the text of the book. And you can see very clearly that this is a note from a graduate student or undergraduate student. So I think we got that problem. But I do think that Manning was so intent on having winning a Pulitzer that he sacrificed principle on some very clear questions with that editor, because anytime an editor tells you we got to go chapter by chapter, and particularly a senior scholar who's published like, I don't know, a book every 3 years of their life, that's suspicious.
Can I just say
fault Manning there, and there's no doubt that he never went abroad and looked at archives. He never really investigated the African piece, and so there's the book clearly should have not been marketed as a definitive autobiography, and it's a poor piece of scholarship. There's no doubt about that. But there are some things in the book that I do think are worthy. It's just that there are too few.
I just want to take 10 seconds and follow up on what Sundiata said, because this is important. I went and did the research. Manning Marable wrote or edited 13 books between the period of time he said he decided to do the biography and when the biography came out. Now, we know Manning Marable is a writing machine, right? You know, he had that column forever and all that kind of stuff, right? You cannot, even if you're a writing machine, even if you're at Columbia, you cannot edit or write 13 books and write a serious biography. There's just no way in doing it.
No. Here's what I'm trying to say, Todd. Manning Marable was not capable of doing a book built around the archives. If you look at everything Manning did, it's written about, he's analyzing secondary sources, right? Even in the Du Bois book, There's no primary research done by Manning Marable. He never did primary research. He's not Gerald Horn. Horn does primary research.
Right.
Okay? And Manning was a writing machine, but he always think of Manning as a journalist, a historical journalist. Don't think of him as a historian in the sense that he's going to delve into primary documents, sift through primary documents. He's going to compare documents across. That's not what he's ever done in his career, but that's the task he set because he thought this book would end all criticism and it would produce the kind of lasting fame and respect from the historical community that he had been denied.
So you're saying he pioneered what Michael Eric Dyson has made an industry off of, which is the biocriticism.
Well, Manning's smart. Was smart.
but oh man, it's so tempting.
It is, isn't
it? But Baba Zach, man, first of all, welcome. Good evening.
Yeah, how's everybody doing?
Good.
Do you want to just get in where you fit in, or I'm interested in any reflections you've had on since our work has come out, or just since maybe the Netflix piece, or where you are, just or anything that's been said today.
Right. Yeah, actually, I think I want to chime in with some of what's been discussed and debated. Before I go there, though, what I wanted to share. Ordinarily, like when this project that Paul, had, suggested, when y'all first went there, and I remember you contacted me about it. I'm one of those brothers that's apprehensive about us doing, what I would normally call reactionary, research.
Mm-hmm.
I believe in proactionary, but there's been some cases in which I think reactionary, is important for struggle. One case that comes to mind off the top, William Styron's Nat Turner, 10 Black Writers Respond.
Right.
That was needed. That was necessary. You're trying to correct, some extraordinary, fallacies and injustices. I think this was also one of those times when it was necessary. So I commend, Paul and, the rest of y'all for, coming forth and, putting in the time and the energy. Otherwise, Marable would have, there wouldn't have been much alternative as far as, biography is concerned with regard to Marable. The other thing that I did want to share too, when you were talking about the whole autobiography thing, I think that I pretty much follow Paul on this. I think that the autobiography is flawed, but it's not fiction. What we do know about the autobiography is that Malcolm and Alex Haley certainly had a relationship. I think what makes the autobiography problematic for me is the fact that we have to rely upon Alex Haley's credibility. And I think Alex Haley consistently proved that he had a credibility problem. Now, I don't remember off the top of my head, but I know that when he was doing Roots, I think he ended up paying out of pocket somewhere in the neighborhood of about $1.5 million from scholars and researchers who he would talk to, and they would give him information, and then it would appear in his book as if it was part of his oral history. Alex Haley was not a credible source for me. And so when I was younger, I didn't understand. As I got older and I began to know the mechanics of how the book was published. And then I guess the major thing that bothers me about the autobiography is that Malcolm never read it in its finality. Alex Haley had given him a couple copies here and there, and he gave it back to Alex Haley with a lot of red marks. Alex Haley didn't like that. Alex Haley also didn't like the fact that, Malcolm started wanting to use the autobiography, which, by the way, it is his damn story. But he, according to Alex Haley, Malcolm wanted to use it more and more as a club against Elijah Muhammad. And so he wanted to try to keep the original, format, the original direction of it. And he thought that Malcolm was going to taint it, or I don't know how you taint a damn autobiography. That's his story. Mm-hmm. But at any rate, and so when you factor those in, when it comes to the autobiography, so my thing is this. I view the autobiography as largely an honorable source, but you footnote it by just reminding people that it has flaws, that Malcolm didn't do this and that, and those types of things. But I still think that the stories themselves are pretty much, still coming from Malcolm. Obviously, if the afterthought I thought was real interesting. According to Malcolm, they had, and according to Haley, they had an agreement that he could, do his own thoughts afterwards and stuff. That's probably the most authentic part of the autobiography, is Alex Haley basically, giving you his opinion of their relationship and all of those types of things and stuff. So, I guess, when all is said and done, I'm glad that we have an autobiography of Malcolm X. I know for me, it changed my life. When I read it, when I was 12, it put me in a whole different trajectory. But I think it's important that we also just acknowledge its flaws and get what we can get from it. But let's not overdo it.
If it's okay,
Right
just to jump in really quickly. From a non-scholar point of view, because I'm a non-scholar, lawyer, more activist organizer, the one thing that we can say about the autobiography, that if it was the intent of Haley and or others to make Malcolm less political, or to make a safe Malcolm from the autobiography, they failed, because through the autobiography, literally, we can't even understate this, millions of people have been politicized, have become activists, have become organizers. So even within the sort of in the way in which we're talking about it, if the purpose from Malcolm's point of view was to activate people around a certain history, whether or not it's sort of, obviously it's important to scholarly document and so forth. But if Malcolm's purpose was to project something so that folks could take in a story, read it, and get something out of it that made them more attuned to how the world works, how we as Black people fit in the world, and what is the organizing, activism, nation building structures that we have to build to get out of it. If someone was trying to stop that, then they failed miserably, because for all it could have been, what it was something that became sort of a perfect storm to really politicize people within a certain time period that has lasted, I can't even say a certain time period, that since the time it was published, has still today done that work that Malcolm, at the time, when he was fighting to either save his life or know that the end was near, knew that would be the lasting piece that he would be able to offer to the world, to hear some version of his story before others jumped in. Later, Marable, I talk about George Brittman, and they begin to give you the Malcolm that they want you to have, that brings people to their stories and what they want you to follow. So I think it's important to note, too, that the autobiography was as close as we got, as Baba Zach was saying, to something that Malcolm wanted to project onto the world for us to understand the relationship of us as a people vis-a-vis America and white supremacy.
You know what? When I read the autobiography, it changed my life, but more than changing my life, it gave me insight into how to analyze my life, right? And what I discovered later, when I read Bill Cross's Negro to Black Conversion that came out in July in Black World 1971, and Cross's pulling from Fanon, particularly Wretched of the Earth, where Fanon talks about alienization and all of the ways in which one decolonizes the mind. Well, Cross crystallized that method of, you have an encounter, and that racist encounter finally sparks you to come to understand the social meaning of Blackness. And so then you plunge into a Black world, right? You begin to read Black history. You begin to join organizations, those kinds of things. Well, Malcolm's life mirrors Cross's Negressen's model before the model was developed.
Wow.
In fact, I would argue that reading the autobiography along with Fanon helped Cross, and I'll have to ask him, crystallize that model. So for me, the fictive aspects of the autobiography work because it crystallizes a story in a compelling way that allows us to see a deep insight into the Black experience and the way in which we become Black. And what's more profound is that what Malcolm describes and what Cross crystallizes into a psychological theory, you don't see that in the autobiography of Frederick Douglass. You don't see that in Ida B. Wells. You don't see that in any of the autobiographies that are published before the 1960s. But in the 1960s, Asada, the same thing. So for me, getting that, I don't give a damn if it's all made up. Getting that, you understand, is so necessary for us and lays the groundwork to begin to talk about liberation activities, because you've got to transform the individual in the process of struggle. And that's what the autobiography does. And that's why it's the most stolen book in the history of the New York Public Library.
Oh, wow.
I would have to agree with you. I agree because I think, again, for me, social scientists, the focus has to be on transformation. Is there a story here that really talks about a transformation? And yes, the autobiography does that, which is why for me, Manning's book was more disturbing, because his book is attempting to say all that transformation stuff is bullshit. Here's the real story. You gotta hang on to this other stuff, which was far more salacious. Some attempt to say, well, look, you didn't know all this juicy stuff was going on too. I think the other thing that's really important is the extent to which the autobiography has been consumed by the general public. I don't think that was ever going to happen, with Manning's book. Nor would it happen with our contradictions, our book that says we want to contradict this. Autobiography was something that really appealed to the average kind of person. They could pick up, like you said, as a 12-year-old, as a 20-year-old, whatever, and say, I can identify with this story. This story has significant meaning to me. And I think it is because so many of us have been touched by his transformation and reading that story, much of which I think really does reflect the life that he lived. We were able to embrace Malcolm the way we have been able to embrace him and hold him up in high esteem. And again, as I said earlier, perhaps one of the things that Manning's autobiography wanted to do was to say, y'all, holding this person up in too high esteem, and we got to sort of bring them down to the earthly level.
This is where I definitely agree with Sundiata, if he in fact was that conscious and aware of the final product, and we couldn't at the time, I felt it, but we couldn't. I don't think we could make the argument in print. But in the years since, listening to Wendy Wolf, the editor, and her presentations on the book, and seeing the feeble condition Marable was in that last video where he's holding up the book. I could easily see how he wouldn't have been able to be aggressive or competently, involved enough. And then also politically, it's a departure from so much of his other work. So that's why that's the other thing that was always struck me as a problem with what was done with this book. But I just want to say I'm very glad that we did this because I was confident, and I think it's been shown to be correct, that Marable's book would be echoing negatively for years. And I was wanting to have us be part of documenting some sort of attempt to resist and challenge it. So I like it. And Todd, I think you pointed this out to me. I like when you go to Wikipedia and find, the Marable book, our book is listed. even when Netflix hated on us. And Baba Zach, I definitely want to ask you about this because I'm not gonna lie, I'm not at you, obviously. I would never be mad at you, but I was mad to see that you and Brother Bailey were in there. And to see what was done. So I would definitely want to ask you about that because there's that one scene, and personally I was offended that they did it in DC at Sankofa Books, that I spent many years building in that spot, many years working with people in that spot. Never saw none of the brothers involved with the Netflix documentary in that space, but they come and use that space to hate on us, where you see him they have the two books, ours and Marable's, juxtaposed on the shelf, and it's a quick scene where they go in and they grab Marable's book and say, "No, this is the one you want." And I was just like, man, that is so. And meanwhile, they're interviewing Brother Bailey and Baba Zach as keynote historians for the piece. Anyway, anyway, my point is, I'm very glad. Paul, go ahead.
Jared,
Go ahead.
I just want to Zach, can I just ask Jared something real quick? Because he said something. He said he would never be mad at you. He said he would never be mad at you. I've never heard him say that before. He'd never be mad. So that's nice. That's all I want to say, Jared.
Imagine me getting mad at Baba Zach. That would be insane. The point I was mad at how I thought that they were doing him and the rest of us. That's what I thought. So and then Baba, when you said what you said in your initial response to when you saw the Netflix piece, I felt vindicated. But anyway, please, if you would, talk a little bit about maybe that experience, and then anything else about how the response you've seen to your work or our work or any of this.
Right. Yeah. First off, the Netflix piece, if I could, I would airbrush every scene that I was in it. I regret it was a mistake on my part. I've been in a lot of documentaries, Malcolm, the Black Panthers, different things like that. This is the only documentary that I've ever been in that I realized it was a mistake. But I didn't know it was a mistake, in part because I didn't do my homework. The first mistake that I made, and normally I would do this, and I can't figure out why I didn't do it this time, is I would find out who the producer was. I didn't. I knew that the people who were doing the filming and stuff, I talked to them, and I knew some of their other work, some of which I didn't, really appreciate. But I didn't find out until they had filmed me. At the end of the last filming is when I realized that Skip Gates was the producer. And we've had this conversation, Jared. If I would have known that Skip Gates was behind that film when they first contacted me, I would have said hell to the no. But I didn't know that. And so I have to live with that. Okay? Because I don't trust Gates. I've seen his documentaries. I don't respect him, as an African scholar, because I don't think he considers himself an African scholar. I think he considers himself a scholar who happens to be Black. So I don't have no time for Skip Gates. But if I would have knowing his commercialization history and other things, no discussion was needed. I would have called it a day, but I didn't know that. I also had no idea what angle they were coming from, because all I did, and they interviewed me twice. I went up to Brooklyn one time and they interviewed me like most of the day. And then they came to my college and they interviewed me all day. They came at around 7:15. I had a class at 8 o'clock. They came into the classroom and they basically stayed with me until 7:30 that night. And I spent the bulk of that time talking about the FBI and the NYPD and their role in Malcolm's assassination. And when they interviewed me in Brooklyn, I spent the bulk of the time talking about the nation, the FBI, and the NYPD. So I'm thinking, that, I'm giving them some good stuff. And then when I see the film, I'm there all day at my college. And when I see the film, they had 10 seconds. They showed a scene where we were sitting down at my desk. Muhammad was sitting next to me. I guess he asked the question, something like that. And then that was pretty much it. But that wasn't the worst part, I can deal with that. The worst part about that film is that, and it's real clear, now what Gates and whoever funded it, what they were really all about. It was about basically showing the Nation of Islam's role in Malcolm's assassination. It was about simplifying Malcolm's assassination, as complex as it was. They wanted to simplify it to make the point that maybe possibly behind the scenes, the FBI might have, did a little bit here and there, but they had nothing to do with the actual assassination. Same thing to NYPD. That was the political angle of that film. And see, my thing is this, and I don't need to say this to y'all, but the nation deserves to be, pulled out there. No problem with that. That's what I do in my book. But how the hell can you put all this emphasis on the nation, but you ignore all of the disruptive tactics that the FBI and the NYPD were doing? And I well documented it. And this was also real interesting. And I didn't realize until at the end what that was about. When I was talking about the FBI, and I would talk, and I would, sometimes pull out my book and give them a citation and all that type of stuff. Their thing to me was, but do you have a copy of the actual document? Huh? I wrote the damn book 26 years ago. In my office right now, do I have a copy of the damn documents? No, I don't have a copy of the documents. But that is what they needed from what I can gather now, that's what they needed in order to put it in in order to, I guess, validate my statements about the FBI. Even if I'm reading directly from a document, they didn't want to hear it for legal reasons and all that type of stuff. But here's the thing. When it came to talking about the nation and all of the different, all the garbage that the nation was doing, you didn't need no extra documents. They wasn't asking for no damn FBI files and all that when it came to the nation. Whatever you got to say, we want to hear it for the nation. But if you're going to talk about the FBI, we need, for liability and legal reasons, we need to see some type of credible sources type of stuff. And it has to be the actual sources. No, that was that really was a charade. Yeah. And like I said, if I could take it back, I would take it back. My understanding is they're doing a second one, and they need not knock on my door. Not to mention the fact that there was nothing, and I want to make this point real clear, because the more, I've only been able to see this film one time. 1.5 times. I started seeing, I saw it the first time, and I was, and the second time, I couldn't see it. I was watching it with my wife, and we were watching for a little bit, and then I realized I started falling asleep, and then I realized it wasn't that I was tired, it's that I did not want to waste no more time with this bullshit. Yeah. But here's the thing. There was nothing in that documentary that represented new information that had not already substantively been covered in my book. Nothing of substance.
And the same can be said about Manning's book.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
Manning is presented as his own idea of the theory of what happened, the actual players and so forth around Malcolm's assassination. And if I don't remember the quip exactly, but basically he said something to the effect that all those books in the 80s didn't amount to much.
On page 490, he says something to the effect that everything written in the 90s is irrelevant. Yeah. Which would include Baba Zat, sales. Yeah.
Right. But you hear something interesting? I talked to Marable maybe about a year or so before his book came out and he transitioned. And we were talking on the phone. And what Marable says to me is, he says that, how much he appreciated my book, and he said that my book was the gold standard. So then I was real curious when his book came out to see what he said about my book or about me. And I think I'm a reference. I think I'm a reference somewhere in there. I'm an end note. I'm a footnote or something like that. But it's like that's not what this guy's telling me, your analysis and your ability to penetrate issues and people, he's giving me all this stuff. And then, like I said, there was like I saw one reference, and that was it. I don't know, I mean, I didn't know Marable that well, but I was kind of scratching my head a little bit on that one.
Jared.
Yeah.
Jared, can I add something just a little bit, off of this point? And I want to go back to what Zach was saying earlier about a response. It was important, and I thought it was important that we do have a response to what came out. And this conversation verifies how important that response was. The acknowledgement of this book so far, and I think it'll continue to be acknowledged as a response, has been noted. We're like 1 millionth of the size of that publisher, but the work you guys did and all the work you guys contributed to actually made this happen. And that will live on as a response. I want to note, though, that in addition to our work, not only did we feel it important, I'm saying as a group, Third World Press did too. Mm-hmm. So in other words, and we had no coordination on this. Initially, I did not know that Third World Press was going to work on a response. They didn't know that we were working on a response. We found that out later. For the record, though, I want to note that Jared, Todd, you guys set an editorial direction that was different than Third World Press.
Yeah.
And that editorial direction was to take on and critically challenge Manning's book. Third World Press and Herb Boyd, they took a different one, and I think just as important. They approached the subject as a balance. They looked at those people who were in favor of the book, those people who were opposed to the book, and brought those together. It's significant that both of those, Third World Press and Black Classic Press, as precarious as our existence has been, still were the ones, because no white press has done this.
That's right.
Still were the ones to offer a type of response and a critique to this major work that may be fiction or fictive. But I was thinking about this, Todd. Even if we go with that is fiction, one of the things we got to say is the greatest piece of fiction that's ever been Because I was listening to everybody on the call. I think every person on this call, and certainly all the people, most of the people that I know politically, had their lives changed or touched or moved in some significant way by Malcolm X's book. And by
That's right.
So I just wanted to add that dimension to it. And I want to tell you guys, this is a story too. I don't know how many people remember, but this is to integrity, right? And Jared had the trust to bring this to me. Ta-Nehisi had written a piece on Malcolm X. It wasn't even, he was doing more a piece on Obama and Malcolm, and he was citing. He got an early draft of Manning's book. That was initially going to be included in this book. But as the work went along, I think it didn't take that long, a month or two or something. Like Jared and Todd brought up the issue, and they actually thought I would have a problem, I think, with it, because they had to be delicate to tell me that, well, Ta-Nehisi's piece was not critical enough, so it wasn't going to make the cut.
I mean, we figured the way I remember it is we figured if we were already, our heads were already on the chopping block, why not go ahead and go all the way with it? Like, I mean, it was difficult. I remember it being difficult, but at the same time, I mean, it would have been more difficult, I think, to not bring it up and to live with that, because we did want to set that editorial direction, but we were also responding to you, because your first call to me, Paul, was hot.
Yeah.
I'm not in your inner circle. I'm not in your, but I've been around you enough, and I don't see you blowing up I don't see you emoting like that. No, and in that call, you were like, "Look, man."
No.
Like,
really.
and to Baba Zach's point, you mentioned the Clark response to Styron and said you wanted this to be in that tradition. And that was like, that's pushing all of my buttons right there. So I was like, it was like ding, ding. I was so anyway.
And for those of you who don't know, John Clark asked me to republish that book, and we did republish it.
That's right.
We published it. Okay. So he wanted the name changed. And the name was The Second Crucifixion of right. Nat Turner.
Yeah.
So that was done, sometime before he died. And Jared, you're right. I do definitely remember that. I just think the leadership you and Todd exhibited in selecting the folks and setting the editorial direction for this piece, it makes it a hallmark and sets it among, and we all should be grateful for our association on this. So I just thank you guys,
No, thank you. Let me just welcome Brother Eugene Puryear to the conversation, fresh off of a lot of work, breakthrough news, probably doing something with Party for Socialism and Liberation, causing trouble for somebody somewhere. Eugene, we've just been sort of reflecting on what brought us to this project, some of the response we've gotten or maybe not gotten is something we could talk about maybe in another round. But any reflections that, initial thoughts on your participation in this book or responses you've gotten from being involved with this book or just anything in general?
No, well, first and foremost, just to thank you and Todd for allowing me to be a part of it. I was not even 100% sure I wanted to write something. You may not remember this, Jared, but I told you I was like working on something and I was like not clear. Was I going to do it? Was I not going to do it? And you said y'all were putting this volume together. And I said I had to do something. And it pushed me to really put it together because, the impact politically, the potential impact politically of the book. I remember when I got Manny Marable's book and I got it from someone who was like, this is the best book I've ever read. So I immediately know that is not the case. And I'm like, well, you know what? Let me just save my attack on them until after I've read the book. And the impact of it on me was deep on a few different levels. One, the just obvious heavy-handed political intervention that was designed to create a liberalized image. Some of the things I couldn't even understand, like the postscript thing about Osama bin Laden. Like, what is this even about? Like, 9/11 was 13 years ago. Like, it just, the nature of it was so ham-fisted that it just enraged me, really, in the context of what was going on here. Because I think, as you put it out there so correctly, Mr. Coates, I think the impact of the autobiography, whatever its flaws, the impact of the coming on of YouTube, and the ability to sort of directly, unmediated by others, for younger people like myself to hear the voice and the thoughts of Malcolm X had such a profound impact. I've been privileged enough to travel around the world to areas where people are struggling, and no matter what the language, no matter what the knowledge, no matter where it is, if people are struggling and fighting against oppression and for liberation, Malcolm X's image is there. It's so relevant to so many people. I even saw today the most famous communist politician in Brazil, which there means something, unlike America, offering an appreciation of Malcolm X. And just the depth of that is so big. So I was just terrified of what the impact of this book could be, because it would have the imprimatur of Manny Marable, whatever else we think about him, that would open a lot of doors, that it just had the imprimatur of a major press. It was thick. And the impact that, the Martin Duberman biography of Paul Robeson has had. And I'm certainly less critical of that book than I am of this one. But having seen over the years how these so-called seminal biographies, I might make a similar argument against Black Against Empire about the Black Panther Party, but these seminal biographies that are put out by these major publishing houses usually tend to have the ability to misdirect people's thoughts. And that's what led me to bring it. So to want to be a part of the text, I would say just quickly in terms of the responses, I'm a little hesitant to say this, and maybe I'm going to say too much, but I feel like we won. Every person,
brother.
every person I have given Lie of Reinvention to has been like, wow, this is amazing. This is blowing my mind. I can't believe this. People who never read the book love it as a book in and of its own right, because even though it's a book of critiques, it's also a book that's people are offering their personal remembrances of Malcolm. They're offering their analytical pieces of it. So you get a lot out of it, even if you never read the Marable book. And for those who did read the Marable book, it was like a breath of fresh air. Now, I don't know. I don't talk to everyone. But I do, in the course of my organizing, deal with a lot of people who are newly radicalizing. I still constantly, all the time, once every couple months, someone says, I read the autobiography. And that's a piece of how they were finding things. No one has ever told me as of yet that they have read the Marable book and that it made any impact on them whatsoever, that it moved them to do anything one way or the other. I'm sure there are people out there for whom it did, and maybe I just don't move in the right circles and it's too narrow for me, but it seems to me that it was a failed intervention, and the fact that there are texts, the Third World Press piece, the Lie of Reinvention piece, that can give you a whole different reality and that are often available at many of our bookstores where, the same things are happening, or the suggestion thing on Amazon, I think has blunted the impact of what I think is the extremely dangerous promotion of a just, and that's the final thing I just say about this. As a non-scholar, the obvious, just a layperson, the obvious lack of analytical rigor and academic rigor in the book, which you would never be allowed to get away with if you weren't doing something they wanted to see. I mean, obviously the most controversial issue in the book, the footnotes. Like, it's one thing to just lie or put a ridiculous footnote in there, but to put something in and then having your footnote, essentially, I have no idea if this actually happened, but a friend of a friend of a friend told a guy 20 years ago who told me when I interviewed him in 1989 in my notes. So this means that Malcolm X is Y or Z. Whether he was X, Y, or Z, that is so irresponsible. It's unbelievable. And I think that speaks to what the book was really all about and a lot of the pieces. But, I'm honored to have been able to be a part of an intervention that was talking about the real Malcolm X and the real lineages, and also the deeper piece of how propaganda is weaponized and used against us, even with our revolutionary heroes.
No, right on. I think a lot of good points you raised. One of them, I think one of the problems, and I'll just say this very quickly, is that I don't think a lot of people actually read or read Marable's book. I think they were reacting to the popular reactions to Marable's book from their friends or their colleagues or some review somewhere, and which was, I think, by design meant to sort of blunt any potential criticism that would come. So when you offer up and say, I have criticisms of the book, people be like, well, how could you? Because everybody says it's great and it's from Marable, but did you read the book? Well, I didn't actually read the book, but so I mean, it's like, well, dang, I sat through and read the damn thing, 600 some pages at least. I don't know, all of it 1+ times, and then several sections many other times. And I'm like, and I suffered through it, and then you don't even read it. And anyway. Kali Akuno, one of the reasons I was very happy that you joined the project, and I'm glad you could make it tonight, among many other things, your long work now with Cooperation Jackson, Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, and so on, is that I thought it was great that someone relatively close to my age who actually reflects in real life the politics of Malcolm X should be involved. I mean, so many people talk about Malcolm. One of the pet peeves I have is that so many people that talk about Malcolm and other these great leaders don't actually like their politics. So here's someone who actually does like them and actually tries to live them. Anyway, so we're just talking about our early reflections of why we came to the project. And any reactions that you've gotten having been involved with our collection that you would want to share, or any other thoughts that you might have, we're happy to hear.
Well, first, good to be here. Second, apologize for being late. I'm trying to just do some pain management, and I even had this down for tomorrow. So that shows you how off I was in trying to deal with this back. Second, we haven't caught up in part because it's back, but thank you, Jared, for helping with that fundraiser, bro. I got the inverter. and it's done wonders to get me to even be able to be back up and do this.
what's up.
Still hurts like hell every time I'm on it,
Yeah.
but I call it the truth serum.
Well, I'm glad, and thanks everybody who contributed, because I know exactly what you're going through, so I appreciate that. Yeah.
Now,
Glad to help.
For the project, I'm glad you're putting this together, because as you know, and I've seen a little bit, we got another set of historical fictions that's out there with this new movie, and it seems like every generation that comes up, we get some new fictional kind of Frankenstein of our folks that we got to kind of deal with in one way or another. And that's how I always felt about that Manning book. You know, I still maintain to this day, I don't know if y'all covered this because I came in late. I still maintain to this day that he didn't actually finish that book. And that there were some other hands who didn't really care to fact check some points or to cross-reference some of the things that was actually, you know, in that long book, which really made it a disaster. So I thought our piece then and now was right on time. And now looking on it, you know, what's this, almost 10 years later?
Wow.
We date ourselves.
Is it?
No.
Yeah, wow.
That's almost 10 years ago, dear. Don't seem like it, but yeah, it's about that long.
Yeah, you gave us all.
But you know, this is just a period where, at least in my lifetime, I've never seen how the skill and the craft, you know, that our enemies have just started to perfect, of taking our own sheroes and heroes and totally using them against us. You know, just distorting their messages, distorting their politics, become, you know, mainstream. The fact that they even considering putting Harriet Tubman on U.S. currency, and ain't nobody, you know, trying to burn the place down for such a sacrilege, but some Negroes out there praising it. You know, that to me is just one of these points where the distortions are so acute that they are using us, our works, our words, our history against us to continue this project, you know, this imperial project of theirs, and folks are just kind of going along with it. You know, that's very dangerous, and I think it speaks to why we kind of constantly have to do our best, even if it's in small venues, to correct the history and be clear and precise about what the politics of what people actually work for and sacrifice for. You know, that's the last piece that I would say I just want to bring into this conversation, for us to remember that and to put the dangers of this kind of revisionism in this actual context of how these things get weaponized against us if we're not careful.
Hey, listen, everybody, we're a little over an hour. I just want to time check. Obviously, I'm not rushing anybody anywhere. I just want to make sure if anybody has to go, that they get a chance to say any piece that they need to say. I have several other questions I definitely want to ask. If anybody has questions they want to ask or raise, please jump on in. But yeah, anybody feel pressed in any kind of way, to any direction? Just checking the.
I wanted to bring up, something Kali referenced, you know, we've been talking a lot recently about the Hampton film, but then there's also the Night in Miami film, which again are these sort of well-made Hollywood revisionist histories of our heroes. And they're done by, nowadays they're done by folks who look like us. They're done by folks who think they have an appreciation for that history. But again, they're done to normalize a certain discussion, to personalize these things in some way, to make them battles between individual personalities as opposed to these larger ideas around liberation, right? And I think that the characterization of Malcolm in that recent movie, to me, again, was another way of trivializing Malcolm and what Malcolm was bringing to the movement and what Malcolm was even trying to do, and having conversations with Muhammad Ali and helping to politicize him and others. So, I again, anytime mainstream white corporate media, whether or not that's book publishing or movie making, gets a hold of Black radical culture or Black radical ideas, their job is to tame it, to tantalize with it, to make it something when people read these things, they're no longer thinking about revolutionary practice. Instead, they're thinking about small matters of like what was the interpersonal relationships between these people that led to this and led to that, as opposed to whole structure and hierarchy above, which were pulling the strings that led to these people being assassinated, redirected, movements being destroyed. As you had Ruber on earlier talking about the Fred Hampton film and how the mistake people are making is thinking about Fred as the Messiah, as opposed to thinking about the Panther Party and how that was a piece of the party which was being targeted to be destroyed during that time period. And so I think that's part of the history that we need to delve into and think about and talk about, for the audience that we have around who these pieces are for and what their ultimate goal is in creating them.
It's funny you say that. I'm sorry, go ahead. Please go ahead.
No, my question was whether or not we're going to see the same thing in the United States versus Lady Day. I haven't seen it. I saw an interview. The interview that I saw of Lee Daniels for me was a little bit disturbing, but again, I haven't seen the film, so I can't comment on it. But it was interesting to me that part of the discussion, Kamal, you made the point about let's dig into these little personal relationships. Let's see what's going on. What kind of salacious information can we come up with? And it was interesting to me as he presented this film. He talked about we need to do this because we have to celebrate the fact that she was a queer woman, and that's not something that people focus on, but we need to focus on that. So we embracing her as a queer woman. And I asked myself, what part of that story is necessary? What part of that tale is necessary in order to put out the true story, quote unquote, of how the United States used her, went after her, and really criminalized her as a result of her drug use or whatever case may be. But again, I haven't seen the film, and so I can't say what the outcome is going to be. But the point that Khalid made earlier is that you don't have to have the white power structure to make these films that distort the true meaning of the story. Our own folks are doing it for us, or they're doing it to us. Maybe it's a better way to put it.
If the butler's an indication, we are in trouble for sure. One point, I don't know if any of you saw the press conference yesterday, but I watched the press conference led by attorney Ben Crump and the nephew of Raymond Wood, who was the deathbed confessing agent who was involved in setting up both now I'm forgetting. Was he involved with
the Black Liberation? Okay, he was involved for sure.
He was in the New York 21 Malcolm. Sorry, right.
Yeah, the Black Liberation Front. About 2 weeks before Malcolm was killed, he was involved in that, setting him up.
So I just want to set this up by saying that to Kamal's point, I saw in the press conference a lot of the same thing that I think happens in these dramatized commercial products. That is, the whole context from my point of view of the press conference was to sanitize the brother Raymond Wood, to sort of humanize him, talk about the stresses and the way he was used by the state to snitch on others, and that the nephew was saying this was a chance to cleanse his family's name, to apologize to the daughters of Malcolm X, to apologize, and then they literally ended his part by saying, this is the greatest country in the world. And then he wraps up by saying, God bless America. And I remember, and they're in the Autobahn, and I'm saying everything that Malcolm fought for is worse today than when he was alive. And yet we're talking as if this is an apology to someone who has won and not a confession to a community that is losing. Anyway, so did any of you see that or have any reflection? And then of course they mentioned, by the way, the brother Thomas Johnson that Kamal you worked for briefly as an attorney. So I thought Baba Zach, go ahead. Did you?
Yeah,
put your hand-
I saw the first 30, maybe 25, 30 minutes. I had a program and I was able to watch, and then I had to, switch off after 30 minutes or so. It was the part that I saw was fascinating. And the thing that stands out the most to me, in the beginning, though, it was a lot of pomp and circumstance and, just silliness in the beginning. Crump was kind of like facilitating it and, but here's the thing. This is what caught me. When I left, the nephew was talking and he said something that, I was with my wife and he said something and I think we both just burst. Well, I don't know if she burst, but I burst out laughing. This is what he said. He was talking about his uncle. He said his uncle was forced to do what he did. In other words, he said his uncle was forced to betray our struggle. Now, I left, and I don't know if he defined the word forced. Like, I don't know if he was saying that the enemy put a gun to his uncle's head and said, if you don't do what we want you to do, we're gonna waste your family or something. I don't know how he was defining force, but when
he was hired, recruited, and told to do a job. That's what he meant.
And that was
let me read what he says.
That's force.
What Wood says in the letter.
Unbelievable.
What Wood says precisely in the letter is that his actions on behalf of New York City Police Department boss was done under duress and fear. And then he adds, direct quote, and that he could face detrimental consequences if he did not follow the orders of his handlers.
Now, Paul Coates, for people in struggle in the Black Panther Party, just as an example, under duress and under fear that if they did not succeed in their mission, their life might be in danger. I mean, is that to me? That to me is more, anyway. But he did suggest in the press conference that had he not performed those duties, the police officers, the police department, which, to be fair, there is some justification for this, that the NYPD would have done him dirty.
He definitely says that they were going to pin charges on him and that they beat people up in his presence and then suggested to him that if he doesn't go along, he will find himself charged with marijuana and alcohol trafficking. And let's be clear, that's probably all true, but it still doesn't justify his actions.
Justify that.
Right? Because technically,
but it's all true, probably.
Right. All he's saying is what William O'Neill said in the Fred Hampton thing. Because remember, they got him on a petty ass charge, and then they used that to basically whitemail him for the next couple years and stuff. And they paid him. So this is my problem. My problem is that, you're trying to water this down. Like the nephew was watering this down.
Right.
And in his letter, my wife just showed me the letter a second ago, and they're watering it down. He's saying, out of fear of threat, and they're going to do X and Y. We need to stop playing these silly ass games. You made a decision to betray your people, to betray these brothers and sisters in these organizations. Admit it, live up to it, take your blows. We don't need to hear all these excuses. He was forced. Wow. Okay.
Well, but the news did break that apparently the Malcolm's daughters are using this to call for a relaunch of an investigation into their father's assassination. So if you want to say something good has come out of it, maybe, I don't know. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say quickly. I mean, it's not like we expect the investigation to do anything more than what it's done, but to lead to a further cover up. And it's no blame
with Biden and Harris in there. Come on, man.
And that's no blame to the family that's looking for justice, I guess. I mean, there's another critique of Malcolm's family, Martin's family, and the attempt to mainstream folks for various reasons that we can get into, of course. but obviously folks are searching for justice. It's just that you can't expect the very people who assassinated your father to admit that they assassinated him and put themselves on trial for it. So we know that that's not going to be what's going to come out of this at all. So, I mean, I think, and you mentioned, my brief representation of Johnson was around Johnson wanting to clear his name, right? Johnson, who was one of the people who was convicted of Malcolm's assassination. And it was, it was a short time. He passed shortly thereafter. He was brought to me by a friend who was doing a documentary on his life. And even though, certain things I can't still reveal, it was a hard decision to make, because even though he wasn't, his claim, obviously, that he was not involved in the assassination, there are other things that we know the nation was doing that he clearly took part in that was disturbing, horrifying, and harassing to Malcolm's family. So, we can't forget, as we definitely, as we talked in this, Bob Azak talked about earlier, that the role that the nation played, not only the role of the federal government in terms of duping members and infiltrating and so forth and so on, but the role that the nation played in terms of trying to keep Malcolm from further politically radicalizing the nation, as opposed to having it remain or be a religious organization that could survive and have its top members strive, was something that clearly went into the calculus for why the federal government knew that there were openings in the first place to do the damage that it wanted to do to Malcolm and to that organization.
That's really important. By the way, I'm certainly no expert, but from watching the documentary Wormwood so many times, which I keep recommending, when they talk about the federal government killing Frank Olson, I believe, the point to your point about not counting on the government to kill you and then prosecute themselves. What comes out in that documentary apparently is that if the government does kill you, as they did with Frank Olson, throwing him out of a hotel window to protect their secrets, they can't be prosecuted and there's nothing you can do. But if they kill you by accident, then you could maybe they can, maybe there could be some follow-up or something. But apparently if the federal government kills you on purpose, there is no recourse that you can take legally or otherwise.
The federal government does a sloppy job and kills you on purpose, as in Fred Hampton's case. There's small remuneration to be made after 20 or 30 years of trying, right? I mean, if the documentation is so clear and it's easier for them to pay something, then they will do that, right? And in Malcolm's case, it's such a relatively speaking, it was a well done assassination in terms of where the blame was laid for dozens of years before Thomas Heyer, Norman Butler's affidavit that first came out and started talking about that the others who were convicted weren't the real folks who were there. When Baba Zach's book came out and laid out that story and that history and used documentation, but yet there is no quote unquote smoking gun, as in, we are going to do ABC to Malcolm on ABC day, right? So that's a harder case to make anyway. But clearly, in this particular case, this the assassination of Malcolm X, even if at the time within the movement context, it wasn't considered the seminal moment that it was, because it was played down, right? And mainstream civil rights leaders and mainstream newspapers treated it as an offshoot of a violent organizing nationalist movement. It is obvious that Malcolm's assassination was one of the most pivotal moments of the redirection of the history of that time period that we can calculate, because of what the possibilities of Malcolm mobilizing around a revolutionary nationalist context, both here at home and internationally, was something that they had to stop.
Well, but Netflix said the lone gunman is dead, so it's a wrap anyway. So I guess, unfortunately for everybody involved, that's an end of the story, because Netflix. Was somebody trying to jump in? Anybody? Any thoughts on any of that?
Jared, I would just say real quick. I mean, I agree. To me, one thing I'm concerned about is even the impact of this continued search for the revelation around the smoking gun. I mean, could you possibly have more evidence of what took place, and whether or not there is some subsidiary argument about how exactly it went forward. I mean, can anyone really look at everything that is there and raise the point with any justification that this was just sort of fratricidal violence between rival gangs is the way they wanted to seem? I don't think there's any way you can really read it in that way if you really read what's available. And I think the continued focus and promotion of, the Crump press conference, the Netflix documentary, of the idea that there's some sort of rock to turn over here, and that by turning over this rock, we will ultimately know the government is responsible. Well, what will that really change between us knowing the government is responsible now and having the exact smoking gun and looking at the entire consequence and context around so many revolutionary people who have been cut down before their heyday, the chemical warfare that has been used? That's an issue we don't really want to talk a lot about, but Kwame Ture, I think, raises it very well in his memoir, the impact of cancer on so many veterans and what that could at least potentially mean.
That's why they threw Frank Olson out that window.
Exactly.
Biological warfare. That was exactly the point.
And to me, it feels it's an impact of capitalist, imperialist hegemony on our minds that somehow maybe there was some other explanation, that somehow the government maybe isn't that bad, that they would never do anything that is that brazen or that wild or that crazy or however people put it. And so I almost feel the whole conversation and the whole song and dance that can constantly create new books, constantly create new movies, constantly create new press conferences about a smoking gun is really just misdirecting us from the overall legacy of Malcolm X, and I think really redirecting us from understanding the role he was playing and why he was such a threat to the establishment, why he was such a threat to people around the world who obviously wanted him dead. And to me, that's the axis of it. So I didn't even watch the press conference. I was confused when I first saw it on Twitter. I thought someone was sharing old news. I was like, I thought we already knew this, that the NYPD and the FBI was involved. Then I figured out it was something new, and I said, well, what's the point? Because we're going to keep having these conversations, and to me, it's a misdirection play from where we really need to be. And I think just the assassination industrial complex that has pushed this on so many different levels for so many different people. I think some of it is irrelevant and important, but at this stage in the game, I feel we have some of the people on this call have provided this information. And so why are we constantly revisiting this? I think that's a question I've been asking myself a lot after this press conference.
There was one thing.
One thing I'll just add on. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Last point is it actually ignores what Malcolm himself told us and what he instructed us. He was very clear. At least we all forget, but just saying this for this audience that may be new to hearing this. He said, I wasn't, the NOI didn't poison me when I was on my international travels. Don't have the capacity, don't have the knowledge, don't have the reach. So it was very clear, from the beginning that was the U.S. government. There was never any mystery or secret about that to Malcolm. He was very clear that there was some willing accomplices, unfortunately, in the NOI who wanted to see him gone for really kind of advance their own personal interests. But he spoke very clearly in the autobiography, which we all remember, about his own knowledge and his own dealings with the FBI and other agencies where they were approaching and working with the NOI and with Elijah Muhammad and doing some consultation. I think, this is one of the things going back to Manning's book, like people wanted to drum up things that we already knew and were clearly, told by the source and were informed about. And I think when we do that, going back on even to your point, Eugene, we miss the lessons or trying to deflect what we actually know about who the enemy is and what his interests are. And some of that has to do with, I think, people playing the continued role of provocateur. I just hope they're getting paid for it. But we got a lot of folks who just wanted to make the American project a little better, a little sweeter, and just try to put it off as if the facts that we know actually don't add up. Try to deny it so that it weakens our politics and our political position and our overall opposition to this project and what it's aiming to do and what it is doing actively to us and the people all over the world. So I don't think that's just a misdirect. That's on purpose. That's a manufactured, industry that they got going to keep kind of drumming stuff off to it be smoke and mirrors when you actually knew from the very beginning, uh, um, who the enemy was, what they were capable of doing, and what they planned on doing from the beginning.
Dr. Breed Merritt, you wanted to get in?
My point was what I wanted to raise is really the question now is how do we move forward? How do we move this conversation forward? How do we move our activism forward? What kinds of things, what direction do we need to go in to keep moving forward rather than, as Eugene suggested, there's no need to rehash some of the things that we already know and we know quite well. We all did a great job in our response to Manning's book, but what does that mean for us now? What does that mean for the community, for the masses? What is it that we're doing to move forward, move the direction of the conversation forward, but also, again, whatever kind of activism we may be involved in?
Baba Zach, you had your hand up.
Yeah. Actually, though, I'm kind of going, I'm kind of going back to what the mama was just talking about, us moving forward from. But what what I wanted to say is that there was one substantive element that came out yesterday that I saw before I left, and that was that supposedly I guess it was in the letter that the guy, that Raymond Woods left. That's worth somebody like me anyway. I'm gonna have to follow this particular point up. But what they basically said in the letter, what he said, is that there was a concerted effort about the week or two before Malcolm's assassination that the NYPD and the FBI were purposely rounding up and arresting on Trump charges and different things like that, some of Malcolm's main security people. And so that's something that I know that I will have to look into that to see whether or not we can validate that. But if that's true, then obviously the significance of that is that if you study any of the assassinations of the 60s that involved, that had the United States government's imprint, most notably, if you look at the John Kennedy assassination, if you look at the King assassination, and I talk about this in my Malcolm book as well, but not, if this is true, then obviously I'm going to be able to add to that, to the complexity of it. But one of the major features leading up to the King assassination and the JFK assassination is they compromised their security. Now, we talk about it in my Malcolm book to the extent that they wasn't checking people at the door. Malcolm had amateurs acting like they were, bodyguards and different things like that. That compromised Malcolm's security. Didn't have guns there, different things like that. But this is significant because what we already know is that the enemy has consistently shown that when they do assassinate, it's been a standard practice for them to compromise the security of the target, leading up to and at the moment of the assassination.
So
to infiltrate, not just compromise.
So can I ask
well, you know what? Historically, they don't even historically. If you study the Kennedy assassination and if you study the King assassination, in those cases, because the enemy technically, particularly in the King assassination, they were providing the security. So all they had to do there is just to pull their people back. They didn't necessarily have to have, agent provocateurs or anything like that, even though technically they did have that. If you look at the King assassination, they had a guy by the name of McCulloch, who had basically infiltrated the Invaders, which was one of the organizations that was thoroughly infiltrated. And in fact, they're the ones that created the mini riot.
The chaos, right.
Right. The so-called mini riot the week before the assassination. But now we're going into some other stuff.
So Zach, here's a question that and my whole frustration with this so-called deathbed confession. How do you spend so much time working, trying to uncover truth? How do you even trust a supposed letter from somebody who has lived in the midst of lies, who's lived in the midst of betrayal for 5 decades. What supposedly makes any truth in
Can
what
I
they got to say?
Right.
can I just add one?
How are you going to navigate that?
Just
That's a good question, Paul, and I want to answer.
I mean, look, I mean, come on. How are you going to be able to
collaboration?
But just as
I don't understand it. Because
just as a point,
every day of their lives for the last 50 years. So how do we trust what they supposedly said?
Okay, I want to address
but
that.
Bob,
But
is that
Jared,
before
you want to say something?
I just want to clarify, just so that we're clear, that on the claim during the press conference, they brought a woman up, and I forget her exact relationship, but they claimed that the deathbed confession was made some 10 plus years ago.
Right.
He recovered. And in the time between his recovery, he had made them promise not to share it until he actually died. And in the time during that recovery, this woman and some apparent team.
Right. She was supposedly a researcher. A researcher.
And she claimed that she did claim a team researched to verify. They didn't explain any of this or lay any of that out. But anyway, sorry, go ahead, Zach.
Yeah, but to answer your question, Paul, are you asking how can you trust somebody who's been lying for like 10 decades?
Scholar. I'm saying as a scholar.
I got you. But here's the thing. You don't.
Yeah.
Right.
You don't. You presuppose that they're lying. But then what you do, though, is you go about the business of seeing to what extent can you collaborate. And basically all somebody like me would try to do, I would try to eliminate the possibilities, as if it did, as if it happened and stuff. Now, how successful am I going to be wasting my time? It's likely. But this is the other thing, though, Paul. What I'm really going to, I'm going to take a shortcut, though.
Mm-hmm.
And the shortcut is I want to go back to the FBI files and see whether or not there was something in there that I missed, 20 something years ago when I was really reading these files like every day and stuff like that, because, after a while, you don't see everything, not when you're all together looking at, 30,000 files all together, something like that. So, so all that to say, I'm just going to give it a shot, but your skepticism, well taken.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did anybody else have a pressing point or comment? Kali, I think you raised something in the private chat that is worthy of bringing up if nobody has a pressing point. If you want to raise it, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, on this piece about where do we go from here and go forward. One of the things that unfortunately, in my view, we see elements of our people's politics going backward. And some of that is well funded and well sourced as to why it's going there. But to put it in the context and the framework of where Malcolm was pointing us to, is that the need for us to build a pan-African perspective and revolutionary program and practice that has never waned. It's different now, because we now have 50 plus years of all the pitfalls of national consciousness that Brother Fanon warned us about, with all the conflicts and everything that has occurred, in the Caribbean and on the continent. And now we got ADOS, which has kind of emerged from the U.S. context that is challenging and really trying to negate a lot of that history that connects our people. And I think this is something that we both need to, challenge and correct, and to speak to the broader necessity as to why still in the 21st century, the need for us to connect with our folks, whether they in the Caribbean or Central America or South America or Europe, on the continent, and now even increasingly in parts of Asia, all over in China and Japan, there's still a critical need, a dire need, for us to build some practical operational unity amongst our folks, to further the liberation project. This is one of the key things I think that Malcolm, if he was still here, would be pointing us to, slapping us in the head about, get your act together, and make this happen, particularly given that we have some tools and things at our disposal now that weren't around 50 years ago, like this tool we're using now, that can facilitate a greater degree of direct connection and communication, albeit with limits. Some things you definitely should not touch on and explore in any of these meetings. But at least in terms of building some relationships and staying up in with what's happening with each other, this can be a greater facilitating tool to do that. And I don't see us, doing enough of it. And I think I'm still one of the people who's kind of up on a lot of what's happening within our movement, even if I can't directly participate in it because of, limitations of time, space, and energy. But I'm not seeing enough of where I think we need to go. I'm seeing some things going in reverse on many different fronts. And I think that's something we need to continue to press forward, trying to figure out the question the Reed Merritt asked of, well, where do we go from here? What's the future? What's our program? And that's just one particular piece that I think we definitely need to figure out and combat, because it's some of these things that I see coming out of ADOS, it really undermines a lot of our history, because look, following that, some of the formulas and stuff I've seen, given Malcolm's partial Caribbean parentage, we should have been talking about him. You let some of them tell it, right?
Well, they had literally created a meme that said that their female founder is an improvement upon Malcolm X. They literally said she's better than Malcolm. So we might have just lost that wing for at least the time being. We might have to just build.
Well, I mean, I don't know. This is one thing I've been arguing with Sister Tanya. We're trying to seize with Chimaranga, bring her into space. She's been talking about. We've been having a little subtle debate about. She's saying that in particular, the New African Independence Movement, that wing of our movement should be, recruiting these folks from ADOS. And I'm saying now, Tandy, unfortunately, that they want to be Americans, right? And they are fully accepting of the American project. So they ain't with us striving for independence and self-determination. They're going in the opposite direction. So we need to be very clear about that as to why they are trying to join the American project. Why are you trying to stick your head in here, Io?
I don't know.
You know, Brother Kale, I think there's a couple of things here. One is that you're right in terms of the leadership. I've run into some very young grassroots people in ADOS, and they lack political education. Many of these, and this is the thing that we have to confront, they actually have a working class base. Most of the organizations in the Black Liberation Movement do not. We're full of petty bourgeois, and we suffer from the inherent limitations of a petty bourgeois person. So we have to try and confront the question of why were they able to penetrate the masses? And it's not just the funding that they're getting from the capitalist class and particularly Trump's folk. There's something else that they're able to communicate that we don't. We also have to find a way to talk more intelligently in terms of the class basis of the international Africans, the Black immigrants that are here from the Caribbean and Africa, because at the level of social interaction, there's very little, and what exists is hostile. So we've got to really work on trying to, there was a moment when the people who came from the continent here were revolutionaries. People who come now are the petty bourgeois, the people who support the neocolonial regimes broadly. So we've got to find a way to find the revolutionary kernel within that second generation of Black immigrants and get them into greater interaction with us, because that first generation is, for the most part, disconnected from us. And only when we're able to do that and make some kind of connection to the working class, because it just, I'm shocked. No matter what city I go in, when ADOS shows up to disrupt, it's working class people. And they've bought into that argument. And so we've got to ask ourselves, what is more appealing to them on that argument? And it's a strong anti-left argument that they're pushing, but somehow they're tapping into the poor sectors of our community in ways that we are unable to do.
Well, let me.
Or have failed to do. I'll put it that way.
I mean, I want to deposit. Let me deposit a couple of quick things. One, I think that element has always been there. In fact, the nation in some ways represents some of that element, right? So that element of Black organizing has always been there, which is more of a, and some of it is understandable in terms of we're here, let's get what we can and make the best out of it and improve our lives, right? A la Booker T. Washington, and so forth and so on. At the same time, I think the other element that is in terms of which way forward, and something that Malcolm talked about in '63, is the liberal element, which has dominated the so-called movement and has been paid to dominate the so-called movement, that has captured radical language. They use terms like self-determination. They use terms like radical, right? They they agree with us on several different issues, some of them good issues. But time and time again, their base is to get us to vote for the Democratic Party as the way forward in which we will get our liberation. They'll use the word liberation. You had one of the founders of Black Lives Matter wrote a letter to Biden after he won saying, I can't wait to talk to you about Black liberation. That was the most ridiculous thing I think I've ever heard. It's like that's the language you use in terms of having some discussion with the leader of the empire. Like, I don't know, like, is that just for public performance? So it's like those kind of things that have captured our movement. In terms of which way forward, we have to figure out, I think we are going to be saying very similar things, is, how do we take the organizing that Malcolm, that Panthers did, that other radicals did from 60s and 70s, that was ultimately, it didn't lose, it was destroyed by the federal government, and others were left standing because the federal government understood what was a danger to it, right? It was the radical politics of revolutionary nationalism, pan-africanism, internationalism that was a danger to it. And that had to be destroyed. And so I think what we're left with, particularly those of us who are, organizing still and creating organizational apparatuses and talking to folks and doing that kind of stuff, is how do we continually put those politics into practice, particularly in a way that captures the imagination of people. Even though they may be scared to do some stuff, you ain't got to do all that stuff that you may have read about, but you got to do something. And it's got to be radical. It has to have a critique to it. It has to be something that moves our people towards a base of self-determination and not towards a base of integration and or siding with the state in order to get some crumbs, knowing that the vast majority of our people will never receive anything but harsh jail, prison time, living in destitute neighborhoods, and dying early deaths in America.
If I could just add 2 quick points. I'm sorry I'm talking a lot, but I came from a class and I had a Red Bull, so I just got a lot of energy to get out. But, I 100% I think what Kylie and Kamau are saying is speaking to me on raising some of these issues. I mean, a couple things, and to tie it into Malcolm. I mean, one, I don't think we can even really talk about the concept of ADOS unless we talk about the total bankruptcy of all Black political leadership in America and the direct tying to the Democratic Party, which has hollowed out Black America for 30 years, and the impact that's going to have on people's willingness to engage in any political platform that seems in any way, shape, or form tied to that system. And that's why I thought that letter from Black Lives Matter, even them complaining that Biden left them out of the meeting on civil rights, well, good. I mean, if he doesn't include, that should be a positive, not a negative. But the fact that it's seen as a negative, I think, gives you the limitations of those individuals. But I pointed this out about the election. In Philadelphia, in Detroit, in every Black majority county in North Carolina, every Black majority county in Arizona and Arkansas, every Black majority county but 2 in Alabama, I think, but 3 in Mississippi, and South Carolina, all but I think 1 or 2. I'd have to go back and look at my research. But basically all the places in America that are majority Black people, Biden got fewer votes than Hillary Clinton. I mean, that's more overall people voted. So if that isn't an immediate representation and recognition of what I think makes ADOS so powerful, is that their basic pitch is none of these people care about you at all. None of them have ever done anything for you. All these different people, and let's just be real, because when you look at the actual, let's go to Newark, let's go to Detroit, let's go to Philadelphia, let's go to DC, where I lived for 15 years. Every sellout, Black killing, landlord loving politician got on kente cloth, and now you're talking about assalamu alaikum. I mean, the cultural stealing of this politics is in and of itself been turned into like, okay, well, you're talking it, but this person is talking it, and what is it really about? And I think ADOS is coming away, and this is the sort of next piece I want to bring about it, that I think also has a certain appeal to it, because it seems to be rooted in American history, right? Like, it's basically Thomas Sowell, essentially, and Walter Williams, and that Black conservative critique, which is, it's a melting pot, quote unquote, society, and Jews, Italians, Irish people, they clicked up and they were able to rise in American capitalist society. So if you just click up as a group, you can rise. And I think we have to challenge that directly from a range of different perspectives. And obviously, Jared, you've spoken to this so much with the myth of Black buying power. That's not even true about the Italian and the Irish. I mean, no disrespect to Boston, but Southie is not my promised land. I mean, if you're telling me that that's what you get from group unity under capitalism, that seems, not very attractive to me. But I think in the minds of people, it's like, well, how are we really going to get something? And how are we really going to move? And all these other people have said something has failed, and this seems historically legitimate. So why don't we? And it never really seems like we've had Black unity in that way, right? That's how it appears to people. So maybe if we just, and I'm using this pejoratively in a way that I don't think is true, but the way people think about it, well, if we just get like the Jews, if we just get like the Italians, we all hear it, that we can do it. And this mythology of that kind of ethnic unity, I think, is a big piece. And the final thing I'll just say about it is, to me, that's the importance of the politics of Malcolm in a way. And I think Khalid's point about pan-Africanism, I mean, I can't remember the quote, so I'm going to, I don't even know. Maybe someone can help me here. But, and Ngugi wa Thiong'o talks about this, the relationship between language and identity, and how the impact of being severed from the traditional languages for African writers and severing who they really are. And it's always meant, to me, it's always said so much about American Black people here in the United States, because that's a powerful thought about being totally severed from your cultural history and your cultural lineage, and what that actually means to your own sense of self-worth, which I think is also to some degree reflective of the growth of ADOS. How do you give that back to people without restoring that link of who you really are, who you really can be, what your true history is? To me, it seems like without that, we can't do it. But to me, Malcolm is a beautiful bridge, because I think he does speak to, still today, so many average, everyday, working class Black people, because of that uncompromising reality. I think it's an interesting teaching, and talking about Malcolm is an interesting way to build some of these links to these things that have been cut off, that I think is what's giving the enemy, in many ways, a lot. And I don't think it's just that. I think the Blexit thing that Candace Owens is doing, you could joke about it if you want. The Kanye West thing, I think to a lot of people it's like a sideshow. To me, that's not a sideshow. To me, that feels like that is gaining ground in a way that is worrisome. And I do think it speaks to how we position ourselves vis-a-vis the Democrats, vis-a-vis the Democratic establishment, and vis-a-vis Black politics, which I think, is become radioactive in terms of much of our own community.
Again, I think that's one of the for me, one of the values of our work here, is because one of the problems that I think that lends itself to the project you've just, Eugene and Kamal and Kali, described, is that if you can start to popularly, with academics, media, et cetera, redefine people like Malcolm as people who wanted the American dream and the American pie and wanted Obama and wanted all of that, then it is easier to rebrand him as ADOS have done for their project, or rebrand, so to the extent that we've been able to intervene and say, no, he was Pan-African, he was anti-capitalist, he was an anti-imperialist, he supported guerrilla armed self-defense, all kinds of stuff. Then we could, then it makes it harder for him to be co-opted symbolically, anyway. Now we've had 2 hours, so let me just time check everybody. Anybody need a last comment? Anybody, want to wrap it up? Let me give you the floor if that's the case. If there are any other comments or questions that we need to address, Paul, one question I would like you to address before we leave, if you would, because I wanted us to talk very quickly about the naming of the book, which I think in many ways has caused more of the controversy than what we actually wrote in the book. Could you talk, because that wasn't initially the title we were all picking, and I think you more than anybody wanted us to go with this title to be an aggressive, overt challenge. That's my memory of it. I ultimately agree with that, but I just wanted to get your impression of it. And
I don't remember it that way.
Okay.
I remember us having several titles, and I have no idea what they were now. But I remember us on the phone and us going back and forward. And I remember Natalie being the one that came up with the title.
Okay.
And we've been discussing it for a while. And when she came up with the title, we all said yes. I remember a collective response to it. How do you remember it, Ty? But I know Natalie came up with it. It wasn't me. Natalie was the one in her smart, wordy self. Natalie is our publisher, and she does all the work at Black Classic Press. They keep saying Paul, but Natalie is the one who really did all the work. I do some mouthing off or something. But that's what I remember. Jared.
Okay.
Now that you say it, I remember it that way too.
Look,
okay,
I
good.
was so relieved, and I think we all were relieved that we had this title, because it really was correcting Manny Marable. It just fit so perfect, man.
It did. I agree, except that I think that a lot of people, again, because part of my point is people were reacting not to what Marable wrote, they were reacting what people said he wrote, and I think people were reacting in some cases not to what we actually said, but because in the one review that I think we actually got in an academic journal that I remember, at least, the whole review was not about what we actually said. It was about our tone and the title and the attitudes of the authors. But nobody said we were wrong. Nobody said they're anyway.
So I don't know about that one, but I know this. That title and the content cut to the chase. That title said, it named it and it claimed it. It claimed that space, and it continues to claim that space. And it's what makes the argument. And this is one of the things that you guys have to forgive me, because I'm from that generation, like Todd said, that baby boomer generation. But look. So this is what I was listening to, and of course I get down politically like other folks, but one of the things that I was listening to was the sophistication of the political discussion and how we make that discussion palatable. How do we make it so romantically attractive that folks want to eat this every day, and they immediately reach out for it? And I don't know how to do that. But I was listening to that and thinking about the writing of this book and the naming of this book, and how I have no problem presenting this book to anybody. You see, because it's clear. And folks, even if they disagree, they still understand that it's something in there for them. It's something in there for them. And at the heart of the discussion of where we go from here, at the heart of where we move forward, and I have to tell y'all, it was very hard sitting here listening to that whole discussion on ADOS, because I don't like to spend a lot of time talking about my enemies. I mean, I just don't. I mean, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it like in a conference or something like that. But these are despicable people to me. So I mean, I just I don't want to spend my time that I'm dealing with the book talking about these awful people. I understand they have to be dealt with. I understand they have to be challenged. But, wow, God, Jim, I don't think they're our worst problem right now. I think our worst problem is that we've got to build structures that actually are attractive and clear enough that folks can jump into those things and live in those things and see themselves in those things. And even if they're distortions, so much I'm getting back to Fred Hampton because, there is certainly a distortion. But the thing that I've interacted with people who even knew the police killed Fred, seeing that on screen blew so many people's minds. Where's the value in that? And what value do we attach to that? And how do we tell our stories going forward with us maybe tilting the lens so that we tell our story? I don't know. But I'm saying all this to say, and again, dealing with how do we go forward, because I don't spend a lot of time with this. I spend a lot of time speculating on this. I don't do. But I do know this, whatever we do, and as long as we do it, it's got to be as attractive as we can make it. We got to make ourselves committed to giving people something that they can see themselves in and something that they can believe some kind of way that they have a role in, a stake in, and they make the way going forward. Other than that, it's like we'll be talking to ourselves tomorrow. It's like one of them things. I don't have suggestions for how we do that because I know everybody on this call has been struggling long enough, and I know that everyone on this call tries to do that, but I don't know. That's all I got to say. I'm just ended. It goes back to the title again, Jared. I have no problem putting that in my hand and presenting it. It's contrasted. It's clear. And I think we felt that in the phone call that way.
Yeah, no, right on. Absolutely. Anyone else? I don't know if these are concluding comments or any other comments. What do you all, anybody?
Well, Jared, I'd like to just, I don't know if this is a concluding comment, but what Paul just said, I would love to see the same group and us open up a conversation about the challenges of organizing our folks in this time period. Because I come at that now after many years struggling to do the work I'm doing now, Paul.
I know.
I'm not selling easy to anybody for shit no more. I'm just not doing it. We at the door. We at the point now. We're telling folks if you're gonna come in and try to do this work, it's gonna be harder than working for somebody else at a regular 9 to 5. You have to put in more time, more hours, more dedication, and the piece around owning and controlling your own labor is actually far more intensive than working for somebody else. Now, how do we say that and not scare people or chase them away? I agree that we have to figure that out. But I think there's a different kind of cold water that we got to present to folks about. We either gonna stay in the same damn place, right, and just complain about it, or we gonna find a way, with our own hand, our own times, our own minds, and struggle our way out of this. I ain't gonna tell it's gonna be easy. Like, no, it's gonna be hard. There's gonna be some sacrifices. There's gonna be a lot of blood spilled probably along the way. But I think there's some psychological preparation that we have to do, because too often saying that making it attractive makes it sound easy, and I think that's one of the things I can say with some of the Cooperation Jackson narrative. I think that we fell into that trap, not knowingly, right, and not intentionally, but I think it definitely is something that built up, was just. Once many folks had to kind of do some hard work, right, and take responsibility. And I'm not into, we got to have another conversation about what I mean by this responsibility. And it's not a right wing trip, so please don't take it in that regard. But you know, once that really kind of kicks in, a lot of folks kind of walk away, for a number of different reasons. And I think that's something that we're gonna have to dig into, in a comprehensive way that deals with our people's deep trauma and mental health and other challenges, that come with it. So I'd love to see, Jared. I'm giving you Kamal, since y'all handling some more media stuff and others. That's a challenge to put out there. There's a set of conversations I think we need to have, that speak to this. How do we go forward? How do we move forward? How do we appeal to our folks? Tell the truth, and give the big hard pills that the folks gonna need to swallow in order to move us forward.
I guess this is what these are my parting comments. It feels to me like 50 years ago. And when I say 50 years ago, I recall my experience being a young college student coming out of a poor urban Black community, dealing with the whole question of, well, who am I as a Black person? I feel like we're at a stage again where we almost have to engage people in this racial consciousness awareness kind of period. Because I'm not sure that the people who we think are our people think that they are people. And so it is a question of trying to understand what we mean when we talk about Pan-African unity, what we mean when we say we're talking about Black folk. What do we mean when we say what we frequently say in Black social work? Because we're always talking about we're dealing with our family, the Black family. I'm not sure that everybody's clear on who those family members are. And what appears to me to be really clear after 50 years is that everybody is not going to be about the struggle that we think we ought to be engaged in. And so part of the decision that we have to make is finding ways to cut that part of our community loose in order to continue to organize and move forward. And I think that that is a very difficult pill to swallow, because we were of a mind, I think, in the 60s, where we just assumed everybody was going to be joining us in this effort to move forward. And I don't know where that is right now.
Yeah, this probably is going to be my my parting. But the questions that we're talking about with the American descendants of slaves or whatever, that organization and organizations like that. I've been bothered by, some of these issues for a while. So I actually have a manuscript which should hopefully be out by this summer. It's called Closing the Black Divide. And what I'm talking about is how can we get Africans, or what I call US born Africans and so-called immigrant Africans, what are the issues that exist between us, the cultural, the social, the mental, the geographical? What are the issues? So we got to talk about those. And then what are some of the solutions that we can come up with to close the divide? So that's the essence of the book. And I'm hoping that it can at least make some type of dent. If nothing else, I'm hoping that it can create a dialogue, particularly between, the Africans who come here versus the Africans, who have been here for a long time. And obviously it's a 3-volume book. Two volumes are pretty much done, even though the second volume deals with the tension between Africans from the United States and Africans in Canada. But then the third volume will deal with just basically promotion of pan-Africanism, because I still think that pan-Africanism is one of the major keys to empowering African people in this country. So hopefully, that will make some type of dent. I think the most important thing, though, that we can do, particularly with Africans from other lands who are all in this time and space, is we got to open up dialogues. We got to talk. Each group have stereotypes of other groups. Africans from the United States, we got all types of stereotypes of Africans, who come here. Africans who come here got all types of stereotypes. The enemy has already, even before Africans come here, the enemy is already, giving them the types of things that would separate them from us, give them all types of stereotypes. I make it a point to talk to Africans from the continent, Africans from the Caribbean. Tell me some of the things that before you came here, what was your image of Africans here? What did you learn? What did they say? And they talk about things like, well, Africans here, they take things for granted. They don't this and they don't do that and all that.
Work hard.
Yeah, right. They don't work hard enough and stuff like that. They don't value education. They make excuses. It's a whole bunch. But hey, each side got some of the same stuff, and each side also got some different stuff. But we got to have these conversations as a first step to start healing the wounds and then forging relationships. So anyway, that's what my book will hopefully do.
All right on. Anybody else want to?
Yeah, one of the things that deeply concerns me, you think about Malcolm and the name of the Organization of Afro-American Unity, that has a pan-Africanist vision, and you think about his efforts to reach out to the civil rights folk for the purposes of transforming them, but he reaches out. We've got so many groups that are so close in terms of ideology, politics, and strategy, and yet over micro differences don't deal with each other. And it seems to me that there's got to be a very sincere effort to bridge those minor political and ideological gaps and build some level of unity, if only to coordinate around certain issues. The Black Radical Congress, while ultimately a failed project, I think it had a correct position that those of us who shared the most in terms of a radical politic should come together first and try to find ways to build unity. We've got too many groups that consist of under 100 people nationally out trying to, quote unquote, lead a struggle. We have to find ways to put past personal differences and conflicts behind us and sit down and talk real politics on what ways can we come together, what are the projects that we can cooperate and collaborate on, and begin to move a radical Black politics in this country that is clearly socialist, clearly pan-Africanist, and clearly believes in coalitions with other nationalities.
Sundiata, I know you know how many times that has been attempted, and you have mentioned
we can't quit.
I'm not saying we quit. All I'm saying is that it's not that these efforts haven't been tried before. I'm not sure if anybody was familiar with Walter Fauntleroy's effort in the late 1980s, where he called together the National
That's not
Black
revolutionary politics.
No,
That's
but I'm
Negroes.
saying, what he attempted to do is to organize all Black organizations that had an agenda that talked anything at all about moving people forward. He tried to organize them and said, are there certain kinds of things we can come together, and build a coalition on? Of course, it failed. But it's not like people haven't thought of this and have attempted to, in some ways, organize. And I guess maybe even the Independent Black Political Party may have also been an example of that. You're right. We have to keep on trying. But how we get it, how we move forward, I'm not sure. We're taking baby steps, and it doesn't seem to be sufficient.
Anyone else? Any final concluding thoughts or responses to that? They don't have to be final thoughts. My own, at least, I just want to thank you all, not only for joining us this evening, but for putting this project together. I couldn't be more proud to be part of a collective to have done this work. It's good to get to catch up with some of you, including some for the first or too infrequent time. And I certainly look forward to some of the challenges and mandates that have been thrown down here. So anyway, those are my concluding thoughts. I just thank you all very much, and definitely thank all of those who have attended virtually and certainly provided a lively chat discussion that I'm gonna go back and read after this later. But anyway, if that's it, I'll just we can wrap up. I'll just thank you all very much. It's been great. Thank you again for joining us for these couple of hours. And well, like Fred Hampton used to say to you, we say peace and we're willing to fight for it. So peace to everybody. We'll certainly catch you all in the whirlwind. Thank you all very much. It's been great.
Thank you.
Good night.
Everybody.
All right. Have a
Peace,
good one, y'all.
everybody. Peace,
All right.
peace.
Take care.
Good night, everybody. Pleasure. It was a
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.